Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing H-tawfeeeek in a 15+2 game on leechess.org. My opponent opens with d4. What can we play today? I'm kind of feeling a King's Indian. I played the Grunfeld last time against d4 in a standard game, and that was a lukewarm experiment. I could probably describe it in harsher terms, but it was an experiment nonetheless. So I'm playing a King's Indian this time around. This is an opening I've played seldom on my channel. So if white plays e4, we will enter the classical variation, and white does. I also play this line from the white side. I have exactly 45 minutes to make this video, so if the game goes long, I might have to cut the analysis kind of short. Fair warning. Okay, bishop e2. Since I'm playing the King's Indian and I don't have a lot of experience with the mainline positions from the black side, I'm going to play a sideline with bishop g4. This is a sideline that my buddy here in Minnesota, international master Sean Nagel, who's a great guy and an excellent player, many-time Minnesota State champion and reigning Minnesota State champion, he plays this line for black. So I've seen him handle it a few times. So the idea is you want to try to fight for d4 and the dark squares in the center. So white castles. I think I should play knight fd7 here. Just trying to reach into my memory banks to remember. So knight fd7, idea knight c6, and then take f3 and attempt to get at this guy. Yeah, let's do that. And hopefully white has never seen this before, and maybe starts slowing down to think or plays suboptimally. It gives me something to work with. It also would have been intriguing to play the main lines with e5 on move 6, but I'll save that for a different day. Those positions can get incredibly sharp. Okay, so white forces me to take on f3. And after bishop takes f3, I'll probably play knight c6 as intended, and then if d5, jump the knight into d4. Yeah, let's do that. White could also play bishop e3 here to support the d4 point. I'll play e5 anyways in that case. And if d5, knight d4. It's possible to get scenarios where you have like a stranded d4 pawn in the center, but it's difficult for white to actually go about winning that pawn. So maybe I can make that happen. So we're going e5. And that stranded pawn scenario could happen coming up here if white decides to go bishop takes d4. Bishop takes d4, e takes d4, knight e2. Then I'd have a choice. I would probably most strongly consider queen f6, supporting the pawn. But I would also think about d3, opening my dark square bishop against b2. In playing the modern defense, I sometimes get positions of this type. So now I at least have a frame of reference for how I might proceed. White does capture. Okay, let's see if they put the knight on e2. They do. So here I have that decision. There's other moves as well. I mean, maybe knight e5 is even playable. Attacking the bishop and attacking the pawn here. So at least 3 candidate moves to consider. d3, queen f6, and knight e5. When you have multiple candidate moves like that, you just want to start analyzing the one that looks most tempting to you. Queen f6 was my original move, so let's start with that. That defends the pawn. The only thing I don't like is white maneuvering this knight to d3. So white could play knight c1. And if that knight lands on d3, it's going to be hard for me to get through. I also can't push d3 after queen f6 because white would just take it with their knight and simultaneously defend b2. So I'm not entirely ruling that out, but I also don't think it's as good as d3 or maybe knight e5. So if d3 is played, probably queen takes, bishop takes b2, just rook b1. I don't know that the b7 pawn is actually hanging, because after bishop to g7, rook takes b7, I do have knight c5, forking the queen and the rook, just winning an entire rook, in fact. Actually, they have queen b1, but winning material. So d3 is looking like my top option at the moment. Now, knight e5, if knight e5, knight takes f3, or knight takes d4, rather, I'd probably continue with knight takes c4, and then I have a very active knight. They would likely play b3 then, and try to kick it out. But after b3, where's my knight going? Because if it has to go back to e5, it's blocking the dark square bishop. So I kind of think d3 could be the best, because if I eliminate that b2 pawn and have a chance to play knight c5, I love my knight on this square. That complements the bishop's diagonal very well. So the only other thing is if d3, what about knight back to c3? White could very well play that. Well, then I play knight c5, and white can't chase me away with b4 because of bishop takes c3. So maybe I can maintain that far advanced pawn. All right, I'm going to play d3 and see how it goes. I thought for a while on that move, but that was important. We had 3 candidate moves, and it wasn't entirely clear which one was best. And he instantly plays knight c3 in reply. Okay, so I mentioned knight c5. That was my default move against knight c3. Also, knight e5 could be considered even here, attacking the pawn. Because if b3, white loses a piece. Knight takes f3, bishop takes c3. So how would white react to knight e5? Probably queen b3. But then there's some massive weaknesses going on around their king. That doesn't look great for them. Take, queen h4, stuff like that. Okay, so I can go the positional route, knight c5, hold the pawn, maybe look to continue a5, and just nail the pawn to b2 so he can't ever play b4. Or I could go the aggressive route with knight e5. Decisions. You know what? Let's go aggro. We're going to play the sharper move. He's been moving kind of fast so far. So he's played 14 moves in under 2 minutes. We do have that 2-second increment. So let's see how he responds to a more direct challenge. I think knight c5 was also pretty good there, though. We'll see which one is objectively better in the analysis. In the times that I played the King's Indian, I've always had fun when playing it. Even if I lose, it is an exciting opening, and you can win some beautiful games, and you can go down swinging. You can also just get completely run over sometimes. I don't think anyone would claim that it's a perfectly sound opening when you're giving white that much center space. Maybe some diehard King's Indian fans would, but black's entire setup in the King's Indian does run counter to conventional chess wisdom, allowing white to establish pawns on e4, d4, and c4, and even f4 if white wants to go for the 4-pawns attack. If you play the King's Indian, you have to be willing to accept a space disadvantage at times. Actually, oftentimes, because of the scenario I just mentioned where white's establishing a bunch of pawns on the 4th rank. And you have to time your counterplay very well. Okay, so white plays rook b1 after some consideration. So that's a careful move. If knight takes c4, they're going to take on d3. I feel like I can increase the pressure now with a move like queen h4, maybe. I could also play a5, but a5 is not preventing anything. b4 is not a threat. So why would I think about playing a5 here? White's threatening almost nothing right now. If I play queen h4, what about knight b5? That is one question mark I have. And what is the idea of queen h4? It just looks like a general move to pressure white's king. They can't play g3 because I take that pawn, but aside from that, does it have much merit? I don't know. G3, bishop g2, f4 is an idea for white. Queen f6 is another try here. Loading up against f3. If queen h4, knight b5, can I just sacrifice this pawn and go after white, like maybe f5? It's probably a bit radical. Maybe queen h4, knight b5, just knight takes c4. Queen takes d3, knight takes b2. It's getting messy. My knight might get trapped there. I could play a6 as prophylaxis against knight b5, but that seems unnecessary somehow. Queen h4, knight here. Rook fc8. Looks so bizarre, though. I wouldn't like to do that. I think if white gets a chance, their next move will be g3. Or it ought to be, in my eyes. And then bishop g2 and f4. Otherwise, it's difficult for white to find a home for this bishop, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to play queen h4. And tentatively, if knight b5, I will return the queen to e7. Because c4 will still be loose, and white's knight is just dangling on b5. I don't really know where it's going. Maybe d4, but it's in the line of fire from my bishop, so I doubt it. So I at least have a backup idea in mind if white pulls the trigger on knight b5. Not even a backup idea, just a intended continuation if white plays that move. And if I get another move, maybe f5. I'm thinking I'm locked and loaded to push the f-pawn, which is a theme in the King's Indian. Push the f5 pawn, try to introduce threats down the f-file with your rook on f8. Tricky position to handle for white, because there are many moves that contain drawbacks. Like the queen really can't leave d1, the bishop can't move. He can play bishop g4, but probably just h5 in that case. Maybe even f5. He still can't play b3 because he loses a piece. Knight takes f3, bishop takes c3. Sometimes playing off your opponent's inability to find a good move is just a smart strategy, especially with a reduced time control. It took a while for me to realize that in chess, by the way. I would play through games of top players and be kind of mystified about how they won sometimes. And then when I became a little bit higher rated, I realized that oftentimes they were just making useful moves and waiting for their opponents to self-destruct. And I started employing that strategy, particularly against lower-rated players, and it works phenomenally. If you can master that sort of play, you can win so many games. It takes a while to perfect. You got to be pretty experienced. And I have by no means perfected that craft. I shouldn't give the impression that I'm like a prophylactic master or anything, but I do win a lot of games this way. So king h1, what's up with that move? I don't understand the point. Because now he really can't play g3 without losing that pawn. I want to just continue with f5. So if f5, pawn takes, rook takes, bishop g4, I can take f2. Pick up a clean pawn. His bishop gets into e6, but big deal. f5 is looking really nice. Knight takes c4, he's still taking on d3. So yeah, let's push. Unless this move has a very specific defensive purpose, I think it has to be a mistake. I don't really see what white is going for. It weakens f2 as well. So now I think f5 gains in value even. So if pawn takes, rook takes, if this bishop moves, I have rook takes f2, which if the king were on g1 would not be the case. He does take. Yeah, I think taking with the rook is good. No reason to take on f3 yet. So let's do it. Now he has to do something about the bishop. We're just threatening to take and then win the h3 pawn and swiftly checkmate him. But if the bishop comes to either of these squares, rook takes f2. Swoop in. And then my knight on e5 will be untouchable. Ah, okay, so he's going to win the pawn back. I actually didn't see that. So he may win that pawn. Rook takes f2. Rook takes f2, queen takes f2, bishop takes d3. Still, it looks kind of suspicious for him. His dark squares are weak. Awfully weak. Just seeing if there's any other trickery I can employ here. Like rook g5, nah, there's no threat. Okay, so we may lose the d3 pawn, but I'm still liking our prospects. We'll pre-move that capture. And I suspect bishop takes d3 will be played because no other move looks any good for white. I might continue with rook f8 at that stage. Just to see if he plays knight e4, maybe I can go queen here or something. And attack the bishop and also eye up the knight. Another idea is to trade and then try to play bishop e5 and maybe create a queen-bishop battery, but I don't think I have to do that quite yet. I'm still kind of in love with my knight on e5. I know you're not supposed to fall in love with certain pieces, but that knight is a great piece. Yeah, rook f8 looks like an easy and good move to play. So this is proceeding along the same lines as what I mentioned a couple moves ago, where I can play useful moves and improve my position, and it's hard for white to do the same because they're under pressure. So I'm not obligated to go for the kill right here, although certain killing moves do start to become apparent. Like maybe there's ideas bringing a piece into f3, trying to get him to take and weaken h3, so I can play like bishop e5 or get another piece into f3. So if he plays queen e2 looking for a swap, I'm thinking queen g3, which hits the bishop twice and also prepares rook f2. So that looks good. If knight e4, I mentioned queen e3, attacking the bishop. And then if bishop c2, I can take on c4 at the very least. This rook is useless on b1 right now. It's only defending the b2 pawn, so not completely useless, but it's a purely defensive piece. Maybe queen c2, but that also loses a pawn. I could trade and then take c4. Knight b5, trying to go after one of these pawns. a7 is guarded by my queen, so I could always play something like rook f7 if absolutely necessary. But I would look at even sharper stuff too. Yeah, hard to find a move for white. Bishop f1, maybe? And then I really start to look at knight f3, threatening queen g1 mate. And then if pawn takes, bishop e5. I don't think it quite works. Okay, he plays something similar, bishop e2. That might be a good try. Solid move. So, he gets the bishop out of the attack. I'd like to get my rook into f2 if I could. So queen g3, trying to go rook f2. This is what instantly crosses my mind here. But if queen g3, can he play knight e4, queen e3, queen c2, and hope to hold out? He seems to be solid on the light squares after that. So maybe queen e3 instead? But then, am I really threatening anything? I don't know. I mean, rook f2 is not coming with the same effect as it would be if I were double attacking g2. It's also bishop h6 here. Trying to go for this sort of idea. But I think, again, he can play queen c2 in that case. Queen e3, queen c1, what's happening then? Queen g3, knight e4. That gives me an idea. I can also play queen g3 or even queen h4 if I really wanted to guard the e4 square, but what is this move accomplishing? I'm attacking c4 if I play it. Is there an auxiliary threat? I don't know. Get the rook into f2. I'm going to try it. I think I could think for quite a while here, and I only have 4 minutes left, so let's play a move. Bishop e2 was a nice find by him. I think there was a lot of ways he could have gone wrong, but he didn't play one of those moves. So I'm attacking c4 in a sneaky way. He could play this or this, defending c4. Maybe preparing rook f1, but I'm not greatly concerned about these a and b pawns. I don't think white could justify going after them with all the pieces I have around his king and his issues in the center. Maybe he could play queen e1 right now. Idea, rook f2, knight e4. Although then I can take on e4, and if queen takes f2, he loses the rook on b1 at the end of the line. So if queen here, is rook f2 just playable in that case? Seems to be so. I put myself in a pin, though, so I have to be careful. I think queen moves are most logical for him right now because he would like to get this rook over to, say, f1 and swap it for my rook. I think the b1 rook is his worst piece right now. Plays queen b3, so defending c4 and attacking the b pawn. I could just play b6 real quickly here. And I might do that because, again, it's an easy move to make. It's not going to get me in trouble. I don't have to calculate what happens if something like this occurs. I mean, maybe I can checkmate him before he causes too much damage on my queen side. Rook f2, queen b7, queen g3, threaten mate. Rook g1. Yeah, I'm going to be practical and just play this. And if he wants to bring the rook over, well, I'll probably agree to the swap and then play queen e1 or queen f2 and attack his bishop and then try to cause some trouble with my queen, knight, and dark square bishop. I wouldn't play b6 nearly as fast if I had more time. Let me emphasize that. This was a practical decision because I didn't want to have to spend another minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes trying to calculate rook f2, queen takes b7. But if I had more time, I surely would have dived into those complications. So now his queen is committed to this side of the board. He could try to bring it back to c2 or something, but I wonder if he'll try to play with it out there. Maybe go queen a4 and harass me further, but I could always play a5 and even guard the a pawn if I want. He can't invade on d7 or c6. My knight covers those squares. You can often pick up on your opponent's tells, like when they start spending a lot of time, as opposed to playing quick, as they did earlier in the game. That often means they're uncomfortable with the position. And if you just maintain the status quo and gradually improve your setup, you can cause them big issues. Okay, knight b5, aggressive. So here, first thing I notice is that this hits 2 pieces. Bishop and rook are undefended. He can go here, but then, I mean, rook f2, that might just win on the spot. Threatening mate and also threatening the bishop. So queen e4, he might have to go back to c3, huh? To defend. There's also the possibility of rook f2 here, but I think he has queen e3 in that case. But then I have bishop h6. So I should consider that. So queen e4 or rook f2. Maybe there's other moves, but those are the most tempting. Queen e4, knight c3. I don't see anything crushing after that. Let's go with rook f2. This is what I set out to do with queen h4. And I'm attacking the bishop with tempo. He could play bishop f1, but this rook is still loose. Maybe queen f4 in that case. Still looking at knight f3 ideas too. Bishop f1, knight f3 would be pretty cool if it worked. Don't know if that's the case, but maybe. Queen e3, I have bishop e5. Your opponent proposes a takeback. I'm not going to grant you a takeback. Unless you want to take back my move. As in, I blundered or something, but I don't think so. I'm just going to hit the X on that. That's very odd. Don't ever ask for takebacks in serious games, by the way. That's about the most amateurish thing you can ever do in chess. It's better to get crushed and allow your opponent all the glory than propose a takeback. Okay, rook there. So I've got discoveries against this rook. Like rook takes g2. There's also rook f3. Which might lead to mate. But you know what? He doesn't have to take it then. He could play queen d1. So rook takes g2 is probably just the way to play now. So rook f3, he can actually go here and miraculously hold everything. So rook takes g2, king takes g2, queen takes e1. He's going to be hitting these pawns, but his king is so open. Oh, I'd really like to finish with a mate somehow with rook f3, queen d1, rook takes h3, but I'm not seeing how I pull that off. Yeah, let's do this. So we're going after that rook. And hitting the bishop with tempo. I'll probably pitch the c7 or a7 pawn. So if, say, king takes g2, queen takes e1, maybe queen c2 now. I'll play probably bishop h6, try to get my dark square bishop involved. Queen e3, okay. So I'm thinking bishop h6 all the same. Tempo move on his queen. Looks pretty darn good. Anything else? Knight takes c4. He has queen e6, so I can't do that. So yeah, let's do this. If queen f2, I'd like to keep the queens on the board, so I'm thinking queen c1, knight takes c7, bishop here. And then try to ransack his position. I gotta be careful about my own king a bit. He's proposing to go into the endgame right now. I don't really want it, though. Yeah, let's do this. I have 38 seconds left, so gotta hurry. B3. Okay, let's bring this in. Just go here, keep the tension. So if knight takes c7, I'm thinking knight d3. I'm not completely sure that works, actually. King f3, could he play? That would be crazy if so. Ah, man. Okay, I'm going to play this. He has knight e6. I'm going to go g5, but I saw knight d3, but king f3 scared me off. I wasn't sure how that turns out. Guess we'll find out in the post game. So he's holding out on the light squares. So I'd like to do this and then maybe maneuver my knight over, like so. He can't take twice on f4 because he loses his bishop at the very end of the line. That's important. Okay, let's just do that. Stay solid. Can pre-move this capture. So maybe queen d2, as I said, coming next. Trying to do something like this. Yeah, let's bring that over. I'm gonna take now. Just got to be really careful with this king. Let's give it a check. Wow, loses on time. Well, not the ending I would have liked, especially with my opponent flagging, but what's going on here at the end? I mean, king g2, he might be okay. Queen e4, queen f3. I always have some sort of perpetual, most likely, but really felt like I should have been winning prior to this. Like, rook e1, there's no way that white's position is holding here. My line won a pawn, but at the expense of losing my initiative, it feels. Couldn't quite figure out what to do. I wanted to play rook f3. And then if bishop takes f3, queen takes e1, check, king h2. I think knight takes f3, queen takes f3, bishop e5 should be very strong. He has to play g3 there. He's weak on the second rank. But the thing I couldn't figure out is if rook f3, queen d1, what do I do then? My rook's under attack. He's guarding the rook on e1. I could play rook takes h3, g takes h3, queen takes h3, king here. But how do I get my bishop to e3? Bishop h6 looks kind of slow. I am down a full rook. Maybe that wins, though. We'll find out. As I said, this will be an abbreviated analysis. Yeah, my position was great. f5. This all seems just good. To my opponent's credit, he found some nice defensive moves. King h1. I was heavily criticizing this move, but he did ultimately win the d-pawn and establish material equality. And even though he was weak on the dark squares, he never allowed me to land a decisive blow. Okay, so let's hop over to the analysis board. Okay, so he had 5 inaccuracies, 1 mistake, 1 blunder for a 28 average centipawn loss. I had 2 inaccuracies, 1 mistake, 1 blunder for a 30 average centipawn loss. And it looks to me, I just glanced, I saw the evaluation there, I might have missed something decisive right around the time where I thought I did. Yeah, someone in the chat is mentioning queen e4. I wonder if that's the moment where I saw queen e4 and he could go back to c3 with his knight. So we have a King's Indian classical, and I play this sideline with bishop g4. Main line is e5. Then white castled, I played knight fd7. This looks really funky, but you do unveil the bishop, and when you have the knight coming out here, there's a lot of pressure on d4. I feel like white should not play h3. h3 gives black what they want, which is a capture on f3. My light square bishop is not likely going to survive anyways, so I'm happy if white forces me to take on f3. Gotta watch those rook pawn moves. I feel like people overplay these moves. h3, a3, h6, a6. So now we're attacking d4. Yeah, and right here, if white had taken on e5, then pawn takes, and I'll still get a chance to use d4 most likely as an outpost for my knight. And white can't really count on using d5 because once this knight moves, I can always play c6 and try to kick out the knight. So knight d4, bishop takes, pawn takes. White could try to tolerate the knight on d4, by the way. You can see the engine prefers that course of action, but it's not comfortable, and he's going to have to play around this piece, which is psychologically never easy to do. So knight e2, and here's where I had those three candidate moves in mind. d3, queen f6, and I also mentioned, I think, knight e5. So the computer actually likes queen f6, so my big concern was knight c1, trying to bring the knight to blockade on d3. Let's just follow the computer for a second. So the knight gets here, play some stabilizing move on the queen side, stopping b4. And I think black's a little bit better, but I think this will be hard to get through. I probably would rather be black, but it's an easier position to play for white compared to the game. So d3. And what about knight e5? That's one more move we should look at. Knight takes d4, knight takes c4, b3. Yeah, this is the line I analyzed, kicking the knight. And now knight b2 I think would be too much. My knight might not come back from home there. I'd have to go after white's knight. So knight e2, I played d3. And then this. So I thought if queen takes, bishop takes b2, rook b1, I was just going to play the bishop back somewhere, probably to g7. It's very important that white cannot take here because of knight c5, fork. So what will happen is I'll be able to get my knight in here, and white will have a difficult time ever kicking that piece out of this nice c5 outpost. But white plays knight c3, and they play that move right away. So their plan was just to deal with the d3 pawn for now, not allow me to take on b2. So I play knight e5. Ah, bishop takes c3. That's not a move I even thought about. If I was a native King's Indian player, I could claim that I wasn't looking at this move because you always try to keep the dark square bishop in the King's Indian. That's your prized piece. But I'm not a native King's Indian player, so I should have considered bishop takes c3. Doubling up white's pawns, and then I could even play knight c5 after that, couldn't I? And this is the super outpost again. There's no b pawn, so white can't ever hope to play b4. And as long as I can hold d3, white is miserable, aren't they? They're solid for the moment, but yeah, this is looking really nice. I should have thought about that line. Didn't even think about it. So I played knight e5, which is also probably good. And here the engine says white should play g3, preparing this plan that I mentioned. Bishop g2 and f4. It would give up this pawn, and I could even win b2. Maybe just queen c2 now. Queen e3. This is an extra pawn, though, isn't it? It's a pretty clean extra pawn. So knight e5, white played rook b1 instead. I played queen h4. Yep, engine likes that move. It also mentioned a6. a6 just went across the screen for a moment, stopping knight b5. Because queen h4 was the one move that I thought prevented g3. Yeah, interestingly, the computer says play g3 once again. So what if knight b5 here? Attacking the pawn. Ah, a6, and the knight might get trapped. Okay, that's a great point that the engine makes. This knight is never coming back home. So maybe I didn't have to fear knight b5 as much as I thought. So in that case, I do like queen h4. King h1. I went ahead and played f5. Take. And here I should go take on c4 rather than the more tidy capture on f5. Just swoop across the board. And if white takes here, am I taking on f3 with my knight and just damaging white's pawns? That looks to be the case. They could even take on h7 check. I'd probably just ignore it. King h8. We don't want to expose our king, so king h8, just keep the king tucked away. White's h-pawn actually hinders their attack, if they have one. Yeah, and this looks very bad for white, doesn't it? I can just lift a rook, probably. I was thinking rook f6, but there might be some more forcing way to do this. Go attack h3. And then if here... Finally go take this pawn. I just want to see how this line goes. So the computer is saying force mate. You dance around, you take the h-pawn. And what happens if they go here? Finally, you play rook g8. Okay. You had to eliminate the h7 pawn to do this without losing the rook. It's a funny line. Again, if I had more time, I would look at this with you guys, but... So I took on f5. Queen takes c4. Didn't really think about it too much, but it makes a lot of sense given that the bishop can be captured if white dares to take on g6 after that. So rook takes f5 is a slight inaccuracy. Now this line establishes material equality for white, but I still feel I must have an advantage. Yep, bishop e2, we found a good move. And here I played queen h4, and I wasn't completely happy with that move, but I'd like to attack on the dark squares. If I could get a queen-bishop battery aimed at h2, that would be the dream scenario. But to do that, I have to move the knight. I have to play the bishop here. I have to get my queen there. White's never going to allow that to happen. And my knight is great on e5 still, so I've got a kind of a superfluous piece issue. Two pieces are competing for the same good square. The engine just wants to play a slow move, a6, stopping knight b5. So I played queen h4. White played queen b3. Better to play queen e1. Here I just played b6. Nothing crushing yet. And knight b5 is just losing, huh? That's a double question mark move. Interesting. So, yeah, queen e4, I would have loved to play this move and then reiterated to you guys how important it is to always keep track of your undefended pieces, but white can play knight c3 in reply and cover the two undefended pieces. So my rook f2 move was good. Queen e4 is just winning. I didn't think about it here. Why didn't I think about it right on this move? That's an obvious move in retrospect. Yeah, attack the bishop, threaten mate. And he can't play bishop f1 due to queen takes e1. So all I needed to do was kind of mesh two ideas together, and I'm winning. Queen e4, which was strong on the previous move, is even stronger here. We're creating a more deadly double attack that white cannot defend. Yeah, that's it. That's the game, queen e4. White's queen can't help out because f3 trying to guard g2, and e2 is covered by the knight. Yep, straight up missed it. So I played this. Also, I was spending a little time looking at this move, but how does this work out? Ooh, knight g4. Yeah, that's probably not a move I'm going to find in time pressure. I was getting quite low on time at this stage. Knight g4 threatening knight f2 check. So as played, I snatched on g2 and then captured on e1. White played queen e3. I played bishop h6. And white defended tenaciously. Yep, they're playing all good moves. Knight takes c7. Here I should grab on a2 according to the computer. But I saw that white was going to play knight e6, threatening queen f8 mate. So I wanted a out against that, so I played that bishop f4 move. And white can just take it, huh? And then probably the position's somehow equal. I would think that black can still press here. My queen and my knight do coordinate better than white's queen and knight, but that might change if white plays knight e6. So knight e6. Here I play g5, trying to support the bishop. Here. Yeah, queen f2 coming up to break the pin. Bishop f3. Oh, where was the moment where I was thinking... there's some move where I was thinking I could play knight d3. Is that coming up? No, that must have been back further. Yeah, it was right here. So instead of bishop f4, I wanted to play this move, trying to go knight f4, but then I saw that he could actually play this, and I suddenly have 2 pieces on pre. So that would have been nasty. So I'm glad I didn't go down that road. Hey, he played some good defensive moves after this. He just flagged at the end. And here I should play queen d3 and keep the queens on. Yeah, I thought maybe I could do that too, but no time. And on the final move of the game, I'm apparently a lot worse if the game continues, king g4. But fortunately, he flagged. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this game. I just didn't leave myself enough time to find queen e4. Even maybe with the amount of time I had, I should still find queen e4, but I was already in pretty bad time pressure at this stage. Otherwise, I like the trend of this game. The opening went well for me. I got good dark square control. I got to play f5 under favorable circumstances. There are better ways I could have played it, like that queen takes c4 move once white captured on f5, but under the circumstances and the fact that this is not a common opening for me, I'm satisfied with my opening play at least, not the later play. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this game, and I'll be back again soon with another video. Talk to you later. Bye.